Alright, welcome everybody. If you can hear me, my name's Ranger Dave. I'm going to be doing a play-by-play for the next hour or so. If you're not familiar with the play-by-play setup, I'll basically be narrating the bear action we see in front of us, kind of like a sports commentator. So I'll do that for the next hour or so. I won't be answering any specific questions that you put into the chat. It takes a lot of multitasking to be able to look back and forth at the chat and then do the camera as well as talk to you folks. So I won't be answering any particular questions. That being said, if you have any questions about anything that you're seeing, go ahead and throw those into the text chat anyway. And there's really a wealth of information from people who've been watching for over the years, and they might be able to answer your question. I will pop in periodically and just see how things are going, and I may be able to pull a question or two out of there and answer those as I go. Also, if you hear me stop talking for any point in time, don't worry, it doesn't necessarily mean we've lost connection or anything like that. I'm just kind of enjoying the view as you guys are. So we've got 3 bears at the falls right now, closest to us, and I'll zoom in on them. We've got 32 chunk using the jacuzzi. This is a really good spot for bears to hang out, especially if they're big. It can be one of the most productive fishing spots at the falls. What 32 here is doing is he's waiting for a fish to bump into him. This water that he's sitting in is really disorienting for the fish. So as they try to clear the falls, they might get mixed up and washed around and bump into him, and then he'll pin that fish against his chest, pin it against the ground, and have a good little meal. This is also one of the only places that the salmon are able to successfully make it up the falls. The water is deep enough here that they can get some good momentum and actually clear the falls at this spot. So this is a really good fishing spot. 32 is taking advantage of it. Up above here, we've got 151, nicknamed Walker, hanging out by the rock. And so we'll see him. What he's doing now is kind of we call it the stand and wait technique. He's waiting for a fish to swim close enough that he can run over and pounce on it and pin it to the ground. And over in his office, we've got 480 Otis. One of the really stalwart bears at the falls. We see him here for really, really excessive amounts of time. The 480 is extremely good at conserving his energy. He'll sit in the water and not have to exert himself at all, really, and just wait for a fish to, again, swim by close enough that he can reach down and pin it against the ground or just snatch it out of the water with those powerful jaws. And so I'll keep an eye out down towards the riffles to see if there's any action that happens to come out over there. Some exciting news from this morning. We saw a wolf on the river for a few moments down by on the lower river by the floating bridge. A wolf was seen for just a few minutes. It popped out onto the river and then disappeared back in the forest. And it seemed to be heading this way. That was a few hours ago, so maybe we'll get lucky and we'll catch a rare sighting of a wolf here on the Brooks River. It's not super typical to see wolves here. There are certainly wolves in Katmai, but since there's so many bears that use the Brooks River, they kind of monopolize this resource in some ways. A lot of other animals will avoid the area just because there's just such a high density of bears that hang out here. So it looks like 151 is going to take off for the day. Earlier in the season when we saw these bears climb up on the cut bank there, it seemed a lot easier. They seemed to be a little bit more slow getting up there. That's because they've gained so much weight. Over the last few months, These bears can gain 1 to 2 pounds every single day. So in just 1 month, they might gain 60 pounds. 2 months, 120 pounds, even more sometimes. So if you're not familiar with the Brooks River area, I can give you a little overview. We're on the Alaskan Peninsula, kind of at the top end of the peninsula there. And so we've got some unique things happening here. Number one, we've got a ton of sockeye salmon that come in through this river. Bristol Bay, which is on one end of one shore of the peninsula, is one of the most productive wild sockeye salmon fisheries in the world. A lot of the sockeye salmon that you get in the store all over the country comes from Bristol Bay. They'll see about somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 million salmon swim through Bristol Bay every single year. And out of that 40 million, those disperse throughout the area. They all swim into these freshwater river and lake systems. Each year we get between 200 and 300,000 of those fish swimming through Brooks River. And there's a number of freshwater river systems in the area that these salmon swim up, but what's unique about the Brooks River are the falls. The falls act as kind of the first temporary barrier that the migrating salmon encounter on their way to their spawning grounds. So they have to stop here temporarily, and so they pool up below the falls. And as they pool up and as they continue to try to pass the falls, the bears know that there's going to be a high density of fish here, so they come back year after year and they capitalize, and they get real fat doing so. Another unique thing about the area is that there are some human developments. There's a lodge, there's a campground, and there's a pretty heavy National Park Service presence. There's a lot of rangers hanging out to make sure things all go smoothly. And so people are able to come here from all over the world and view these wild brown bears. Possibly even more unique than that is the fact that we have these Explore.org webcams set up along the river, so people from all over the world don't even necessarily have to come here, and they can enjoy these bears, enjoy the scenery, learn and be inspired by all these amazing things that we have here, all from the comfort of their homes. And, you know, speaking of unique things going on the river, it is not typical to see brown bears at the falls at this time of the year. Generally, the sockeye salmon run will peak sometime in July. And then by the end of July, things taper off. The fish, for the most part, move out of the river and they continue swimming up into Lake Brooks. And from there they go into the small tributary creeks that flow into Lake Brooks, and that's where they actually spawn. What'll happen is the bears will follow them there because, you know, they want to continue capitalizing on such an amazing food source. So they go into these little tributary creeks. They might go into some other areas around in the park as well in search of food. And so for the month of August, we don't see a whole lot of bears at the falls. We do get generally a small run of silver salmon. And so sometimes we'll see some bears here fishing, but really not very predictably can you see bears here in August. And then in September, as the fish have spawned in those small tributary creeks that go into Lake Brooks, they begin to die. And so they start floating back down the Brooks River, and they'll end up kind of at the mouth of the Brooks River and the Neck Lake. And again, the bears will come back and feed on those dead and dying salmon. So generally this time we'll see bears down more at the mouth. What's interesting this year is two things. The sockeye salmon run has lasted an incredibly long time. Typically, like I said, it'll end towards the end of July. This year it's just continued on all the way until the end of August. Even now we're still seeing some sockeye salmon jumping the falls, which is really unprecedented. Another unique thing is how large the silver salmon run has been this year. We get all 5 types of salmon in the Brooks River, but the vast majority are sockeye salmon. Like I said, somewhere around 300,000 fish each year. I don't have an exact number for an average silver salmon run. As far as I know, they're not counted formally, but this year we've certainly seen more than what is normal. And so because of that abundance of fish, both from the sockeye and from the silver, we saw bears hang out here all August. So, some of them never left at all, and now we're starting to see bears come back, expecting to see dead and dying fish down in the mouth of the river. But when they come back, they're finding all these silver salmon that are still migrating up the river, and that turns out to be kind of a better food source than those dead and dying fish. And so they're gonna capitalize on that. So we're seeing 32 now doing just that, eating a silver salmon. The silvers are quite a bit bigger than sockeye salmon. They'll average about 10 pounds, twice the size of a sockeye, which averages about 4 or 5 pounds. And so especially at this point, the silver salmon are going to have even more calories than a sockeye. Not only are they bigger, but they're pre-spawned. So when the salmon enter the river, once they enter fresh water, they stop eating altogether. So all of their energy expenditure, all the action that they do, it's all derived from existing fat stores. And as they use those up, they become less nutritious, and by the time they spawn, they're just about out of all that energy, and so out of all those that stored energy, so they become very lethargic, and eventually they basically starve to death. One interesting thing that I'd like to point out about 32 is he had a pretty significant wound on his rear end just a few weeks ago, maybe even 1 or 2 weeks ago, and he's healed incredibly fast. Bears, it's absolutely unbelievable how quickly they heal, and that could be due to a variety of factors. It might be just part of their biology. It might be partly because of how many calories they take on in such a short amount of time. And so as we can see, that wound is very close to fully healed. .32 is a young adult bear. He's in his early teens, certainly younger than 15, somewhere between 10 and 15 years old. I believe he was first identified in 2007 as a young subadult. Another bear that this could be would be 503. Certainly a energetic bear. Fall is a particularly difficult time to identify these bears, as they get bigger over the course of the season. You know, they get so much bigger, sometimes even their facial features will change a little bit. Their color also changes. Right now they're growing in and probably just about have grown in their winter coats, which are darker and thicker than their summer coat. And so that can cover up scars that were previously used to identify them. Also, during the early summer, they have some sometimes unique shed patterns that, although they change throughout the season, they can be used to help identify each individual. And as we saw 32 Chunk, as he took off, you know, it reminds me again of just how individual these bears are, how unique they are. They have different personalities. Even though 32 is a pretty big bear, he's not very dominant. He's not aggressive in the same way that some other bears are. He doesn't tend to push other bears out of certain fishing spots. He likes to play it safe. He likes to stay out of other bears' way. And I mean, so far that's been working for him. He's been able to put on quite a bit of weight. And he's been able to stay out of trouble. He's been able to stay safe. Minimize his injuries. And all these kind of unique individual behaviors, I think it's a testament to how intelligent these animals are. They learn from their personal experiences. Each bear had a, you know, unique upbringing and has its own unique life experiences. Maybe 32 was successful in avoiding other bears as a subadult or as a cub, and so he's continued to practice that successful behavior. So this is the first time that you're watching us here, either on Explore or on Facebook Live, or if you're just you've tuned in this season for the first time. There's a really great resource to help you identify these bears. That's the Bear ID book, The Bears of Brooks River. You can find that on the Explore Bear Cam page, just below the video feed and above the comments section. You can also find it on the Katmai website. It's a free download, and it's got a lot of really great information about the individual bears here, some of the most commonly seen bears. It's also got some pictures of each bear, both in the summer and in the fall, because they change so much. So as you're watching the cams, you can use that and compare what you're seeing on the cam to what's in the book and help you identify some of these individuals. You might wonder, well, what's the point? Why do we need to know who's who? I mean, I guess for me, the number one thing is it's just a whole lot of fun. But beyond that, you can really learn a whole lot about bear behavior, about the bear the brown bear species as a whole from the individuals and from their unique individual behaviors and attributes. We really learn a lot about the individuals. We know because they return each year, we can learn, you know, how are they adapting to their environment? How are they learning new skills? How are their personalities changing as they grow? So the more I continue to watch this bear, the more I move away from thinking it's 289. Just seems a little bit too small. And the color doesn't seem to be quite right. But we'll continue to watch, and let me know what you think on the chat. I might be able to check that out from time to time as well. It can be really difficult to tell males and females apart, especially when they're younger bears. Really, the only way to tell is to see it urinate. If a bear urinates with the stream going backwards between the legs, that would indicate it's a female. If the stream goes straight down, that would be a male. Of course, if you see genitalia, that's a pretty obvious indicator, but oftentimes you don't see it. If you ever see a bear with cubs, that's a clear indication that it's a female. Male bears play no part in the child rearing. Some of this bear's behavior is also kind of indicative of 503 or another subadult bear. He's moving around quite a bit, quite energetic. Doesn't seem to have learned how to fish quite as well as an older bear would have. Fishing takes a lot of patience. Bears like 480 Otis, they've really mastered a technique, and it really pays off. You see how much weight Otis has gained in the last few months. It's incredible. He looks like a completely different bear. Another thing to remember when we're trying to ID bears is it doesn't necessarily have to be a bear that we've seen before. It could be a totally new subadult that's come in and is exploring this area for the first time. That's always a possibility. One thing that I have to remind myself of is it's not always the bear that I want it to be. A week or two ago, I saw a young bear that was probably just slightly bigger than this bear. And I thought, oh, I think that's 89 backpack, because I think mainly I thought that because I just wanted to see him. So I've always got to remind myself not to let my own desire and bias sway who I think I'm seeing. But if you're just tuning in, we'll give you a little reintroduction. My name's Dave. I'm a volunteer park ranger here in Katmai. We're on the Brooks River at the Brooks Falls, and we're watching wild brown bears fish for salmon. We've got one younger adult or subadult bear on the right side of the screen. We're not quite sure who he is quite yet, he or she. Up here by the rock, we've got 151 Walker. He's a 9.5-year-old male. He's got pretty distinctive ears and also a slightly upturned snout. That's a good way to help identify him. And then the star of the show, 480 Otis, hanging out in his office. Otis has that right ear that's a bit flopped over. Lighter coat. And at this time of year, very, very, very fat. Which is awesome. That means he's got a much better chance of survival than a bear that hasn't put on quite as much weight. And another interesting thing about Otis is, well, number one, he's quite old. He's, I believe, 19 years old. Certainly in his late teens, and The average lifespan for a bear is about 20, so he is getting up there for a bear. He's missing 2 canine teeth, one on each side, one on the top, one on the bottom. And so on neither side of his mouth does he have, 2 canines where he can cut into the salmon and more easily rip off the skin and delicately pick through for the brain and the eggs. So he's at a disadvantage there, but he's done well to adapt. He's taken more time with each fish than some other bears, and he's remained successful, maybe even more successful than a lot of these other bears here. And because he's gained so much weight, it seems that he's become a little bit more aggressive than in some previous years. Maybe he feels a little more comfortable defending his spot. Maybe he feels like he needs to defend it. He needs a little more urgency. But he's pushed some other bears out of his area, and he's stood up to more dominant, more imposing bears. Kind of stayed his ground and stood up to bigger, badder bears so he can continue fishing. So I just took a quick look at the chat, and it looks like a lot of other people are thinking 503. I'm not necessarily convinced, but it's certainly where I would place my bet if I had to. I'll say that. I mentioned earlier that we've had a really strong silver salmon run. We've seen about, between 5 and 10 salmon, between both sockeye and silver, jumping per minute at the falls. I've done some kind of informal counts over the last week or so. So it's not, not a scientific number by any means, but from what I've observed, between 5 and 10 fish per minute is what I've seen jumping. And those are about, roughly 50-50 between sockeye and silver salmon. So really incredible to see that many fish still moving past the falls at this time of year. Really pretty unprecedented. So if you're new to the cams this year and you've watched through August, there's still great stuff to see in August most years, but generally we don't see this many bears in August, and certainly not in September at the falls. Generally those bears are down on the lower river where we have 2 other cams. So if you're watching on Facebook Live or on another platform, I'd love to see you check out Explore's webcams all here and all over the world. They've got some really awesome cams. The bears are certainly my favorites, but there's a lot of cool stuff. It's pretty amazing that we're able to... Well, here's a little interaction between 480 and 151 now. 151, he's just he doesn't seem to care about other bears very much. And again, that probably goes back to his life experience so far. I would imagine he hasn't had too much trouble with other bears if he's this comfortable being so close to other big male bears. Bears are pretty solitary creatures. They're really not social animals, so given the choice, they take the space to themselves. But like I've been saying, very much individuals. They're all unique. They all have different temperaments, different behaviors, kind of different personalities. And although I would expect 480 to stand his ground against a much smaller bear like 151, it still kind of goes back to what I said a few minutes ago, is just that 480's become really fairly dominant this year. I wouldn't necessarily put him into the top 3 or anything like that, but certainly on the upper end of those mid-range bears on the bear hierarchy. I haven't talked a whole lot about the bear hierarchy today, so I should probably mention that. Because so many bears come back to the falls year after year, because there's such a high concentration of bears here, they have to coexist somehow. If they got into a physical fight every time that there was a competition over a fishing spot, or competition over a female, these bears would not last very long. They're so powerful, they're so capable of inflicting damage upon one another, that there's been this hierarchy that's developed. And the bigger, more dominant, more aggressive, more willing to get into one of those physical fights, they're gonna rank much higher in the bear hierarchy. Other bears are gonna leave them alone. They're gonna give them a lot of space, and they're not gonna challenge them for any reason. So those bears have a advantage over others. They have better access to fishing spots. They have better access to females. And so other less aggressive, smaller male bears are gonna rank lower on the hierarchy. Surprisingly, sows with cubs, female bears who have cubs with them, they rank a little higher on the hierarchy than you would imagine. And that's mainly because, they're just more aggressive. They're willing to defend their cubs. They kind of have something to fight for. So a lot of other bears will leave them alone as well. Not quite as much as one of these real big aggressive males, but still a lot of large bears will leave sows with cubs alone and give them a wide berth as well. And of course, last on the list, lowest in the hierarchy, are these young subadult bears. Younger bears and subadults. They're still figuring things out. They're not big enough to really adequately defend themselves against a bigger bear. Still learning how to fish, learning how to interact with other bears, so they try to give larger bears a lot of space, and a lot of times they won't even come to the falls because this is where the big guys hang out. And we've been seeing this bear, I don't think I've seen him catch a fish yet. So he's still learning. Bears They're incredibly intelligent, but just like us, they've got to learn how to be successful. And they do that by watching other bears, by trial and error, learning from their mother. It looks like he just picked up some scraps, probably left behind by another bear. And the reason that these bears need to, these young bears and subadult bears need to be careful is, to a bear, calories are calories. So a real big male, he may prey on a younger, smaller, more vulnerable bear. There are no morals in the bear world. There's no code of ethics. They're not humans. So it's all about survival, and it's every bear for himself. I think it's really important that we make that distinction, because if you do view a wild animal through a human lens, through the lens of morality, it's going to get real dangerous for that animal, because they do things that don't go according to our rules. We've seen, for example, wolves like the one that we saw earlier today, they used to call this whole continent home, just about. They used to be one of the most widespread mammals in North America, and now they inhabit about 10% of their original range. That's because we viewed them through a human lens. When they preyed on the same animals that we preyed on, moose, deer, bison, they became a problem. But then they really became a problem when we wiped all those hooved animals out, and we began farming and having livestock. And so then, okay, the wolves, they still need to eat something, so they'd prey on the livestock animals. And through a human lens, that's thievery. It's wrong. It's evil. But it's not. It's just the wolf surviving. And because we viewed it that way, over the course of the 19th and even into the 20th century, we basically decimated the wolf population in North America. And it goes back to viewing animals according to human rules. So we've got this amazing resource here, these brown bears. And it's important that we remember that, when we see them do something that might be difficult to watch, it might seem wrong to us, it's just survival. It's a wild animal doing what it can to survive. So I mentioned this earlier, there was a wolf spotted for just a few minutes on the lower river by a few rangers. So keep your eyes out. We haven't seen it since. That was this morning around 10 o'clock. Not a very frequently seen animal on the Brooks River. It's not unheard of by any means. We see them, maybe once or twice every year or two. So we saw these two bears show up to the river together. Seemed like they were following each other, seemed like they were being friendly with one another. And this is the reminder that there are no friendships in the bear world. 151 really just put this other younger bear in its place. Reminded it that it needs to keep its distance. Even a more tolerable bear like 151 will try to displace other bears if it sees a need to. So that goes back to the competition over the resource that we talked about earlier. Goes back to the hierarchy that's set up, and the hierarchy is always, you know, it's always changing, it's always being reinforced.
Ja.
Bears certainly do play, and I wouldn't be surprised to see these two bears playing at another time, but I would certainly call that more than playing. One of the interesting things about the interaction we just saw is after 151 kind of, you know, kind of scolded this other younger bear, which, you know, the more I look at him, the more I think he's maybe 503, but again, not totally sure, so I don't want to throw that out as a definite thing. These subadults are really hard to identify, but after that interaction occurred, 151 walked away. He turned his back on that bear. And you can't always tell who comes out on top in these interactions, but a lot of times the bear that walks away is the more dominant bear. And what's happening is the bear is kind of saying or showing that, you know, I'm not afraid of you, I don't even need to look at you, I can just give you my backside, and I'm not concerned that you're gonna try to retaliate because I'm more dominant and you're going to submit. And that's, you know, that's exactly what just happened. So most likely this bear is going to, you know, hang out a little bit farther away from 151 for a bit of time now. He might even leave the area altogether. And, you know, back to the lack of ethics that bears have, the lack of morality. You know, 151 didn't come over here and confront this bear because he's mean or because he doesn't like him or anything like that. They're competing over the same limited food resource. And 151 increases his chances of survival if he has more access to those food resources, and if he can convey to other bears that, you know, they need to give him his space. And kind of maybe coincidentally, as I say that, 151 has caught a sockeye salmon.
Oh ja.
So as 151 eats that fish and continues to catch more, I want to focus in on 480 for a moment. Just kind of a minute ago, I saw him almost looked like he was dozing off, and he does do that. If you look really closely, as he's concentrating on looking for fish in front of him, as he's conserving his energy, he does sometimes start to nod off to sleep. And there goes 151 getting real close again. So as you watch the cams later after the play-by-play, if you get a good view of Otis, look for that to happen. He's really an amazing conserver of energy. He just sits in the same spot, doesn't have to exert himself at all up until the moment that he actually catches a fish. So we've got the old and the new right now, 151 and 480. Otherwise known as Walker and Otis. I haven't seen Otis actually catch a fish today, though in July, cam viewers combined with some rangers up here counted 44 fish in 7 hours. That is just an incredible amount of calories. Each fish contains 4,500 calories. And I say this all the time, but just in case anyone doesn't know, 9 cheeseburgers equivalent per fish. So somebody will have to do the math on that for 44 fish, but you know, I believe it's up into 300. So I'm gonna, for a moment there, this younger bear took off and went up the fish ladder, went to try his luck there, and I'm interested to see if he tries fishing the lip. And looks like he's a little bit nervous about 151 being in the area because of that altercation they had just a few minutes ago. Definitely subadult behavior from this bear here. Tried up on the lip, he's tried down in the riffles, tried the jacuzzi, doing a lot of snorkeling, a lot of dash and grab. But also looks like a fairly big subadult. And you just might be able to see genitalia there. Yep. So it is a male. Which was, you know, indicated by his size and behavior before, but definitely couldn't say for sure. But definitely a male, definitely a younger male. Still figuring out how to be successful up here. We saw him grab some scraps. That's what a lot of subadults will kind of make their living on in their earlier years. there's not as many fish here as there were in July, so he's not going to be quite as successful being so inexperienced. The animals can move in and out of parks. There's no enclosure here. The bears, the birds, the fish, the salmon, they're not confined to a national park, and we need to make sure that we can protect them everywhere in the world. There's a lot of things we need to do in order to achieve that. Some of it's individual action, some of it's lifestyle choices, I mean, I've said this before, we vote with our dollars. If you support an industry that isn't so good for the environment, you're basically voting to do something harmful to the environment. If you buy products and services that are good for the environment or that don't have an impact on the environment, have a lesser impact on the environment, you're voting to conserve our environment. Also comes down to what we eat, how we travel. Buying things locally is always good. Reduces the footprint, reduces the need to transport things with fossil fuels. And just how much we consume. The less one-time use things we can have, the better. The less impact we can have, the less we fill our landfills, the better. And it might not seem like it, but it all comes back to places like this. If we want to keep these amazing animals in these amazing places, it's going to take another 100 years of work and conservation. But I tend to think that people are inherently good as opposed to inherently bad. I think if we all work together, which I think we can, I think we can really achieve a lot.
Is it possible to access your recording?
So I've been on for about an hour or so I'm gonna call it a day for now. We'll have some more play-by-plays being scheduled for the remainder of the week. This one was pretty short notice, but I'll try to give you guys more notice next time so you can prepare. I have a whole lot of fun doing these things and hope you guys enjoy them too. So long for now, and I'll talk to you again soon.